Hi everyone, and welcome to video 3 of the Take 10 7th and 8th grade curriculum. In this video, we're going to cover chapter 2, values and principles. But first, let's review our last video. So in the last video, we talked about how conflict is a situation of disagreement or tension that can have many outcomes, including positive ones. We also talked about how violence is anything that harms a living being, and that can be mental or physical harm, and it could be harm to a place or a thing. And lastly, we talked about Take 10 Principle 2, schools should be violence-free zones. So the most important thing to remember for Chapter 1 is that conflicts are just a part of living together with people, and they aren't always bad. And we felt so strongly about this that we made it into a Take 10 principle. So we already covered this pretty thoroughly in the previous chapter, but one thing I will add is I think this is the principle that is most obviously true, but also the one that's hardest to accept. Because we often think about conflict as something that makes us nervous or angry or that results in bad stuff like ruined friendships and punishments and things like that. So we just try to avoid them as much as possible. But if we just accept them as part of our lives, as something that's normal and to be expected, then our goal shifts from trying to avoid them to trying to respond to them in the best ways possible when they arise. And that perspective shift is super important for practicing Take 10. All right, so now without further ado, let's dive into chapter 2. Oh, it's so lame. Wow. Okay, so what I want you to do now is think, if you were stranded on an island with plenty of food and fresh water, what 5 things or people would you want to take with you? So think about that for like 3 minutes, write down your ideas in your packets or in your journal. And if you want to share with a partner or with the whole group, let's give the class 5 minutes to do that as well. So go ahead and pause the video for this. So the things that you chose for your desert island experiment are some of your values. And values are what we think is important and good in our lives. And these could be anything. They could be people, places, things, or they could even be concepts like you value your own safety or your freedom or love. All those things are your values. And in talking about values, let's look back on that weird challenge that I asked you to do at the end of the last video. And I promise it'll make sense why I asked you to do this in just a moment. So I asked you to fill a jar to the brim with sand, water, or dirt outside, and then to try to fit rocks into that same jar without the sand, water, or dirt spilling out. And now I'm going to read you this short story, and I've included the words on the slide here so you can follow along with me. So this is from A Day in the Life of a Philosophy Class. So a philosophy professor stood before his class with some items on the table in front of him. When the class began, he wordlessly picked up a very large and empty mayonnaise jar and proceeded to fill it with rocks, about 2 inches in diameter. He then asked the students if the jar was full. They agreed that it was, so the professor then picked up a box of pebbles and poured them into the jar. And he shook the jar lightly. The pebbles, of course, rolled into the open areas between the rocks. He then asked the students again if the jar was full, and they agreed that it was. The professor then picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. Of course, the sand filled up everything else. He asked once more if the jar was full, and the students responded with a unanimous yes. Now, said the professor, I want you to recognize that this jar represents your life. The rocks are the important things: your family, your partner, your health, and your children. Things that, if everything else was lost and only they remained, your life would still be full. The pebbles are the other things that matter, like your job, your house, your car. And the sand is everything else, the small stuff. If you put the sand into the jar first, he continued, there's no room for the pebbles or the rocks. And the same goes for your life. If you spend all your time and energy on the small stuff, you'll never have room for the things that are important to you. Pay attention to the things that are critical to your happiness. Play with your children. Take your partner out dancing. There will always be a time to go to work, to clean the house, give a dinner party, and fix the disposal. Take care of the rocks first, the things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is just sand. So the philosophy teacher here is making an argument about what we should value, the stuff that's really important to us and makes our life worth living. So to think this through, let's do a little activity. So on your class board, I want you to make a 3-column chart and label the columns rocks, pebbles, and sand. And if you're using a smartboard or projecting this video onto the board, I have a table ready for you on the next slide, and you can simply pause the video on that. If you're at home, you can talk through this activity with the other people in your household. But as a group, I want you to brainstorm ideas to fill in each column. So start with the rocks, the things that are the most important to you in your life, or the people or ideas that are most important to you. So for example, this could be family or safety. Take 5 minutes for that, and then move on to the pebbles, the things that are important to you, but not quite on the level of those rocks. So these could be like your sports team that you're on, or your cell phone. Take another 5 minutes for that, and then give your group 1 minute to list anything else in your life, like literally anything else. So this could be your pencil, your a t-shirt, the party that's going on next weekend, anything like that. Just take 1 minute to write down anything you can think of for that. So here's the table, and as a group, fill it in, and this should take about 12 minutes. Okay, so now that you're done, I want you to talk through each column with a partner. Is there anything that your group put in one category that maybe belongs in a different column for you? Is there anything in the pebbles or sands columns that you treat as if it's a rock? In other words, is there anything that isn't that important in your life, but that you treat as if it's super important? And lastly, is there anything in the rock column that really is very important to you, but that you don't treat as if it's as important as it is? So I want you to talk with a partner about those questions for 5 minutes. All right, now we're gonna switch gears and talk about cereal. Stay with me here and think about Fruit Loops for a moment. What is the same about all Fruit Loops, and what's different about them? Think about that for just a moment. What you probably came up with is that Fruit Loops come in different colors, but they all have similar shapes, right? And this might blow some of your minds, but they all have the same flavor as well. So they're all exactly the same on the inside. At Take 10, this is how we think about people. We may look a little different on the outside, but on the inside, we're all the same in that we all have the same human nature and we all deserve the same treatment. A lot of times people might make a lot of the outside differences, just like they do with Fruit Loops, and might fool themselves into thinking that the outside differences mean that there's a difference on the inside. But at Take 10, we know that everybody is equal and deserving of equal treatment. And the outer differences just like make life more fun and exciting. And just like Fruit Loops, you know, like the colors just make it more interesting to eat them. So this commitment to equality is an example of a principle. And a principle is a specific type of value involving our beliefs about right and wrong. It's the rules or guides by which we live our lives. So now I want you to do one more turn and talk and talk to a partner about what is one principle that you live by besides equality. You can't use that one because I used it. So think of one other principle that you live by, and think of one principle that your parents have taught you. And maybe you disagree with it, or maybe you follow it as well, but think of one principle that your parents have instilled in you too, and talk about that with your partner for 5 minutes. Okay, so now we're gonna review. In this video, we learned that values are what we think is important and good in life, And principles are a specific kind of value that deals with our beliefs about right and wrong, or the rules and guidelines by which we live our lives. And we also learned Take 10 principle number 3, disagreements and arguments are normal and to be expected. So that's it for this lesson. Your challenge for next lesson is to watch any movie you want, and think about how the characters respond to conflict in their lives. Did their response work well? And how could they have responded differently? All right, that's it for today. Thanks and take care.